All right, so things are not looking too good for Brendan Schaub. Recently, Mark Harley returned from his hiatus, and he's back to posting on the Fighter and the Kid subreddit, and he's giving us some insight into what's going on over at Thick Boy Studios, and it's pretty bad. Mark claims that Brendan owes him $16,000, and he's filed 5 separate complaints to the California Labor Commission for failure to pay him, and now he's being investigated. But also, Mark said that Brendan has been claiming there's a company that hasn't been paying him recently, and they owe him $1.4 million. And I know it sounds crazy, and I have no idea if the amount is correct, but I think there is some truth to this, and it's not CAA. I think there's another company that might owe Brendan some money, along with a lot of other podcasters. And recently, somebody on the Fighter and the Kid subreddit was able to put the pieces together here, because recently another big podcaster, Jim Cornette, on his show, he was talking about this podcast production company that he's been working with, Cast Media, and he says they were helping him get ads for his podcast. But he claims for a good amount of time now, he's been doing ads and they haven't been paying him at all. And he's got a pretty big podcast, so it sounds like they owe him a good amount of money. And he's obviously pissed about it, and he's been talking about it a lot on his show. And he said there's probably a lot of other podcasters out there that are dealing with the same kind of problem with Cast Media, or even worse, he said, because his podcast, he only relies on them for advertisers, but there's some podcasts that might rely on them for like hosting and producing and all this stuff.
Not only us a significant amount of money, but now we've come to find out all kinds of people significant amounts of money. And we've gotten some more clarity on not only the people that he's been ripping off, but also the way apparently that he's been spending people's money.
Well, since the show came out, since the clip came out, we've heard from a lot of podcasters or podcast creators, producers, people who are in somewhat of a similar boat to us. Again, we were in a situation where he owes us a bunch of money, but we're free and clear. I don't know if we'll ever recoup any of it, but he doesn't own anything. We're good to go, do whatever we want. Not everyone's in that position.
Yeah, so people have been speculating that this relates to what Mark was talking about, because Brendan actually does work with Cast Media, unfortunately. So this seems to add up with what Mark was saying. You know, originally he said it was CAA, but then he corrected himself. On Reddit, he said, yeah, there's a game of telephone involved in me getting this info. So the person who told me, he said agent and not CAA, and I must have assumed it was CAA rather than Cast. But he's definitely been complaining about the late payments from Cast this past year. So that's not good. You know, it seems like this company might actually owe Brendan a lot of money. But, you know, you'd think Brendan would talk about this on his podcast a little bit. Brendan could actually gain some sympathy for once. You know, if this company actually owes him over $1 million, I mean, that's pretty messed up. And you would think Brendan would use his platform to call this guy out on it and try to make more people aware of it, because it seems like it's happening to other people as well. But I guess maybe there is some legal thing that's preventing Brendan from talking about it. But it's too bad, because it sounds like the CEO of Cast Media, this guy Colin Thompson, it sounds like he's such a douche, like way worse than Brendan. Like Jim Cornette said, while this is all going on, the CEO has been bragging about this brand new house that he just bought, and he's taking vacations all over the place and posting about it on social media.
We're hearing from people because the only social media he apparently is active on is his Instagram, which is now private. And I probably have a good idea why. He's been living it up and having a good time with his wife in Las Vegas.
Also, we understand maybe taking some international vacations, jetting around the world.
We've heard from people who say Colin's been doing these vacations with his wife, and a lot of people don't think highly of her. They say she's never worked a day in her life. Some people use wife in quotes, which is interesting. And the other thing we started hearing from people about is that apparently he's been bragging about a $2 million custom home. Not a home he's purchasing, but apparently, allegedly, a custom-built $2 million home. I hope he at least names a urinal after me in there.
Yeah, so if this is all true, this guy sounds like such a dick. I mean, people rely on him for a living. You know, if you're a podcaster and you make your money from ads, and this guy allegedly hasn't been paying you, that would suck. I mean, you could be losing your whole income. And then you see this guy on social media flying all over the world, buying a nice house. I mean, I'd be so pissed off about that. And it sounds like Jim Cornette is really going after this guy. Like, they're talking about suing him, and it sounds like they're going to continue talking about it until everybody gets paid. Like, recently on his podcast, his co-host was reading some of the messages that they sent to Cast Media, and it sounds like they're not messing around.
We are absolutely going to sue Cast, and you personally, in at least 3 states, if we do not receive what we are owed. Please direct me to whom your legal counsel is, so I could pass along that info to my legal team. All advertising has been halted. We will be informing sponsors and agents on Tuesday that Cass has decided to keep our money for themselves. Also, I'm going to instruct my team to immediately begin production on a new podcast called Does Colin Thompson Owe You Money? I will budget half of what you owe us to advertise it all over Los Angeles. I bet there are others with something to say, and I'll find them.
How are those billboards working out?
Well, by the way, I was asked not to do this just yet because of the pending litigation, but this is going to happen.
Yeah, because we hadn't actually got to the pending litigation yet.
Yeah.
Go ahead. There's more, folks.
And if you want to hear more about this and stay updated, you could check out Jim's channel, Official Jim Cornette, on YouTube, because it will be interesting to see what happens with all this. Like, also, Cast works with some other really big podcasts like Impulsive and I think Whitney Cummings' podcast, and I see Ty Lopez and Sarah Silverman. So I wonder like which ones allegedly haven't been paid, because I would imagine Impulsive, like if Logan wasn't getting paid, he would probably go off. I mean, he has such a big platform, he could destroy this guy. So maybe he was trying to pick and choose like which ones he thinks he'd get away with not paying. And it looks like Brendan Schaub might be somebody they weren't paying, but unfortunately he hasn't talked about it at all on his podcast yet. And I know he doesn't like talking about drama or being involved in drama, but this is something you have to talk about. I mean, you can't just let this guy get away with this. And also, Brendan could destroy his reputation. You know, if he got Joe Rogan to talk about this guy would never be able to work again. And I would imagine Brendan is pretty fired up about this, because not only is he losing out on all this money, like a lot of money, but also now it's causing problems with Mark Harley again. And now he's being investigated by the California Labor Commission, and he has to deal with all that. Like, I'm sure that's going to be a giant headache, and he's probably going to end up owing him even more money and paying all these fees and stuff. And also, Mark claims that Brendan might not be able to pay his current employees if he doesn't get the money from that company soon, even though I think Brendan should still be able to pay them, and he should be able to pay Mark if he actually owes Mark this money, because Brendan's driving around in Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and I saw he just did a $10,000 bet with Bradley Martin. So if you're doing that kind of shit, you should be able to pay your employees. But I bet Brendan would say keeping up the image is part of the business. That's why he needs to spend that money or something. So I guess he'd rather just deal with being investigated by the California Labor Commission rather than downgrading one of his cars. And I saw somebody on the Fighter and the Kid subreddit talking about this. They said Mark showed them some of the complaints he filed, and he said it looks like Brendan really screwed up in terms of Mark's employment, because he didn't keep track of any sort of time records for hours worked or overtime or meal breaks, despite Mark being an hourly wage employee. And he said the complaint has screenshots that show he wasn't compensated for overtime or mileage or being on call. So this sounds like a mess, but it sounds pretty accurate. You know, I'm sure Brendan doesn't keep track of any of this stuff. And also, it sounded like Mark was working for him pretty much 24/7. Like, Brendan was always asking him random stuff to do. Like, I wonder if he'll be compensated for the time he worked as Brendan's baddie wrangler, or if he'll get like paid per baddie wrangled. I don't know. It's up to the California Labor Commission to figure that out, but it'll be interesting to see what happens with this whole situation. You know, there's a lot going on here, but let me know what you guys think about it all down in the comments. And then make sure you go check out my Patreon account for exclusive content. You know, if you like to stay updated on this kind of stuff, I talk about it a lot on there, along with a lot of other topics. I also do like longer documentary style videos, like about the downfall of Milo Yiannopoulos, the downfall of Adam 22, the degeneracy of Ari Shaffir, Kramer, Michael Richards' rant at the Laugh Factory, and I recently just talked about the biggest fight between Brian Callen and Brendan Schaub. That was pretty funny. So if you want to hear about any of that, make sure you go check it out. I'll put a link in the description, and then hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you at the next video.